Excellent, we'll start. So lovely to meet you all. My name is Keith Grant. I'm a recruitment manager at Engage People Recruitment. A bit about Engage People maybe before I get into the details of today. So Engage People are a specialist recruitment consultancy firm based in Dublin, but we hire all across the country, and we specialise in recruiting in financial services. So within that, accounting, insurance, compliance and banking would be our key areas. And my background, I'm not actually a recruiter by trade, I'm only doing it about a year and a half. I come from a banking background. So before I worked for Engage People, I worked at Deutsche Bank for about 15 years in a number of different roles, not HR related now, this is all banking kind of stuff. So the content that I pulled together today on interviews, it's coming from my experience as a hiring manager at Deutsche Bank, interviewing all the time for my teams, but also my experience in speaking with clients as a recruiter in terms of the feedback they're giving me on candidates I'm sending through to them. So it's I'm taking the experience from two areas of my life essentially. Before I get into the detail though, I'd like you to know a little bit about me as a person. So this picture, I think, or these pictures would summarize my life, I think, best. So the first picture is a picture of myself and the number one thing in my life, which is Taco Bell. I'm a really, really big fan of Taco Bell, I have to say. And it's also in that picture is my partner, Peter, who I've been with for 17 years. We live in Dublin, in Ringsend, with our two dogs, which is Derek and Mavis, the next slide across. More from them later in the presentation. The next slide across might not be familiar to those of you from outside of Europe, but I'm a big fan of the Eurovision Song Contest. It happens every year in a different country, and this is a picture of me last year in Italy, where Ireland did not do very well. And then the last picture is probably the picture I'm most proud of. It's a picture of myself with some of my colleagues from Engage People. This picture was taken in the Shelbourne Hotel last year when Engage People won the best recruitment agency in Ireland for the second year in a row. So that's a little bit about me. We're going to talk today about interviews, but before we get into the detail of interviews, I want to tell you genuinely what people are saying, as in interviewers, hiring managers are saying about interviews and feedback that they're giving candidates. So on the screen, and I'm not sure how well you can see this, this is some genuine feedback that my clients have given me on people who have gone for interview in their companies. So I won't read them all out, but some of the content you can see here, they didn't have any questions for me. They had a great CV that didn't bring any relevant examples or any examples at all actually to the interview. She learned her answers off by heart, not sure she believed everything that she was saying. This kind of thing I see all the time. So what I've pulled together today in terms of content is going to help you negate all of this stuff. If you take away anything that I say today in terms of preparing for interviews, etc., you can almost be guaranteed that you won't get this feedback post-interview, okay? So what is it that I'm going to be talking about today when we talk about interviews? So there's three very, very exciting topics that we'll cover. Before the interview, during the interview, and then after the interview. It's as simple as that. Or as I say here, the preparation in advance of the interview itself, and then the outcome of the interview. And the outcome is really the piece that will help you deal with the rejection or the celebration of receiving a job offer. So let's get into preparation. Any fans of Schitt's Creek in the audience, or ever heard of it? Very good. This is Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek. She gives lots of advice, lots of sage, sound advice, I would say. And one piece here that she says is one must prepare for any event. And when we're talking about interviews, she's absolutely dead right. I think 65 to 70% of the success of interviews, it comes from the preparation that you put in beforehand. So we'll start on preparation. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, that sounds great, but how do I prepare for an interview? What do I need to do? There's three key areas that we'll focus on here. So the first piece, and this is so important, is that you read the job spec. So not the job ads that you applied for on Irish Jobs or on LinkedIn. You should receive a job spec from your recruiter or from the company that you've gone for a job with. That will detail what the job entails, so the day-to-day of the job, but will also detail the requirements for the job. Now they might call it a nice to have or a must have, but I would read through all of those requirements specifically as part of your prep. And I would make a note of concrete examples in the past, either in your work life or in college, where you can evidence that you've done that. So one of the requirements might be, as an example, must be a great team player. So as part of your prep, write down a note of an experience you've had in the past. It could be group work in college, where you know you've played a really good part of a team. Note it down and move on. So for all of the different criteria that you have on your job spec, you should have a note written down about how you can evidence that in interview, okay? So just write it down. You don't need to learn anything off by heart. Just write down a scenario from the past that links into the requirements. most candidates, and I say this to all of my candidates, but most candidates don't match all of the job spec. In fact, it's very rare that you would have a candidate going for a job where they tick every single box in the requirements. So don't let that put you off a job. If you see a job that you're really interested in, and if you meet 70% of the job spec, I'd send through an application. But definitely focus in on those areas then where you don't meet the job spec. So if it's something very specific, like a technical qualification that you need to have for the job and you don't have it, I probably wouldn't apply. But if it's some experience in maybe a specific type of programming language, or it could be a specific area of finance that you don't have experience in, I would still go forward with my application, but I would be thinking of the question that, because it could come up in interview, oh, we actually were looking for someone with this, and it says it on the job spec and you don't have that on your CV. The way you answer questions like that is, I know I don't have this, but actually I have something else, and there could be some transferable skills there, and if there's not, I would be transparent anyway and say, yeah, look, I don't have that, but I'm a quick learner. I have an example from the past of a time when I've learned something really quick, and it's X, Y, Z. And it's showing that you're not trying to waffle around not having a skill set, but it shows that you have a willingness to learn it. So read the job spec. This piece is also so important in terms of prep, and a lot of people don't realize the importance of it. When you send your CV to someone, the assumption is you've written it, you understand every single word on that document, and you purposely put that word on the CV. So you should be able to talk to every aspect of your CV. Most people will focus in on the prep, on your education, and if you have any work experience, and you're thinking of good examples that you can go through of teamwork at college or difficult customers in work, and we'll come back to that in a second. But actually, where people get caught out in terms of the CV piece is, you know, the bios that you put at the start of your CV, or some people do, excellent communicator, team worker, looking for a job in data or whatever, or the skills at the end, great at motivation, great at talking, good oral communication skills. Those pieces, if they're true, definitely put them on, but be prepared to talk to them. So I've seen interviews where the interviewer has said, you've put down on your CV here that you're a good listener. How do you know that? Give me an example of someone who told you you're a good listener and you put that on your CV as a result. And although it could be that you're a good listener, those questions might catch you off guard because you're not thinking of questions on that part of the CV. But remember, the takeaway from this point is every word on that CV is yours, so just be prepared for a question on it. And the last piece, and I put in a picture of you doing your reading here on the right, read the internet. There's two reasons for that, right? The first piece is you want to understand the company that you're going for a job for. So definitely read their website, that's going to be a given. Do a bit of research though, use Google News, search for the company's name, look for positive news articles about that company, and I'll tell you later about how to use them. And then the other piece is do a bit of stalking on LinkedIn. Definitely look up the hiring managers or the interviewers, look up their names, click into their profile, don't be afraid to let them see you looking at them. Look for pieces of things that you might have in common. Maybe you went to the same university, maybe you live in the same area, maybe you have the same interests in the groups at the bottom. Potentially, depending on how comfortable you feel, you could use them at the beginning of an interview in terms of, oh, I saw on LinkedIn that you live in Bray, I also live in Bray, did you see that new place that opened down the road or something? If you feel comfortable to break the ice that way, it just makes, there's a bit of a human connection, it makes you definitely feel more at ease as well, and it's a good tip. I like when people do that. So that's preparing for the interview in advance, right? So you've done all of your reading, and that's you on the right there doing all of your reading in advance. You've read everything. What's next? Do you need to understand the interview that you're going to? Is it going to be a virtual interview or is it going to be in person? If it's virtual, please check your technology at least the day before. I've been burnt in the past turning on my laptop when I'm working from home and suddenly there's a Microsoft update that takes about 10 years to download. You don't want that to happen 10 minutes before your interview. Check your technology the day before, make sure you can log into whatever platform they're using, so it could be Teams, it could be Zoom. Make sure you have the latest version of that all installed the day before, and check your surroundings as well, which is also important. So what I mean by that is make sure the room isn't really noisy like it is in here. Make sure your background is quite plain, so it doesn't have to be a plain white background, but you don't want it to be really busy so that instead of the interviewer listening to you answering your question, they're trying to see the books that you have on the shelf, or they're trying to look at the pictures on the shelf to see who they are. You want the focus to be on you in the interview. So that's tips for virtual. If it's in person, use Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever map you have, even if an atlas if you've no phone, to look at the location of the building that you're going to. Make sure you're comfortable that you can get there from a commute perspective. If you're driving, make sure you know where the parking is. And I would also recommend that you use Street View, which will put you in front of the building as well. So you have a very clear view of the type of door you're going in, if there's a pathway. It just makes you feel that little bit more at ease on the day because you're very clear in terms of where you're going. So prepare your outfit in advance. I say here dress to impress. This piece has so many different schools of thought that I could do a whole seminar on how to dress for interview. My advice is always the same. I would always, always, always go in business formal attire to an interview, like this gentleman here. You might be going for a job with a tech company where you know that they're very, very casual. They could be going in tracksuits, it's very dressed down, you know that environment, you have friends who work in that environment. Even so, on the day, I would go in business formal to an interview. You're not going to upset anyone by turning up in an interview business formal, because that's a historic expectation. Whether it's right or wrong now, who knows, but you're not going to offend anyone. You might offend someone though if you go into an interview in an environment where you're dressed down slightly. Even business casual, never go fully casual, but even business casual might leave the wrong impression with a certain type of interviewer. So just be mindful that you're never going to go wrong with business formal. And the last piece, I say no stress, I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but genuinely put yourself in their position, the interviewer's position. They've seen your CV, so they probably know that you can already do the job. So you don't have to go in there and tell them how good you are. If they've seen your CV, they're willing to take time out of their day to meet you, that's a positive. The other piece is there's a position available in their team. So I would assume then if there's a position available in their team that they're busy, they don't have enough people to do the job. So the last thing they want to be doing is taking time out of their day to come and meet strangers to see if they want a job. They want you to be successful. They want to meet you, be like, box ticked, love this person, give them the job. So you have all of that on your side when you're going into an interview. So you should be going in confident, cool, calm, collected, and as I say, no stress, you got this. And that's a big piece of advice, I would say, and I know it's easier said than done, but I promise you, if you feel comfortable going in and treat it as a conversation as opposed to an interview, you'll feel a lot more at ease. So we're on the day of the interview now. Before we actually get into the content of the interview, the admin bits, I say 5 minutes early to arrive, completely ignore that. I use that as a middle ground. If it's a virtual interview, I dial in 3 minutes before. Any more than that, you've probably all seen this on Teams and stuff. You get a notification if someone has joined the lobby to interview. If you dial in 10 minutes before, you might have the interviewer kind of panicking about trying to wrap up stuff, and it just leaves a bad impression for you. So 3 minutes early for virtual. If it's an in-person interview, I'd arrive maybe 10 minutes before at reception. So 5 minutes is kind of like a happy medium in the middle. Know who you're meeting. So that's a mistake I made when I got my job at Deutsche Bank, my first ever job out of college. I had to ask for a lady called Laura at reception. She was the hiring manager. And I asked for someone called Aoife, and I don't know who Aoife is. I don't know why it came into my mind, but I asked for Aoife. Now, Laura never found out because it was the receptionist I asked for Aoife. But it always stuck with me for years that I don't know why I did that. And particularly after you've done your stalking on LinkedIn, you should know who you're meeting. So it should be relatively easy to have that name off the top of your head. Oh. Close your eyes, close your eyes, close your eyes. Okay. This is another point. So this piece is more coming from my experience as a hiring manager at Deutsche Bank and doing countless hundreds of interviews. The first thing I want to say on this topic is you don't need to bring anything with you. You don't need to bring a CV because you should know your CV. You wrote it, it's yours. You don't really need to bring a pen and paper because the questions that you want to ask in an interview, you don't really want the answer to, and I'll come back to that in a second. So you don't need to bring anything to document anything. You don't need a copy of your CV. But if you want to bring them for comfort, or maybe it's a special type of interview where you do need to bring something, get a nice handbag or a nice briefcase to bring them in. Don't bring it in a carrier bag, or don't bring anything along with you like a carrier bag. At Deutsche Bank, I've seen it all actually. So I've been going to reception to collect people for interview. I've had people with their groceries. So they've asked to leave the groceries behind reception so that, do you want to sit in the front row? I'm only messing. You can sit down there if you want. So they've come up with their groceries and asked reception to hold their groceries while they interview. I've had people come with luggage, so either they're coming from the airport, going to the airport. That bit I can kind of understand. Bring a suitcase. I've had a lady bring a cat, so a cat in a carrier thingy from the vet. So I've seen it all. And although the interview might have gone amazingly well, as an interviewer, and you probably shouldn't think like this, but it happens, so let's be honest, that leaves an impression in my mind that I don't want her to work for me. What would she bring into work one day? Her cat? So just be mindful of your first appearance. You only have one chance to make a first impression, so don't bring a Tesco carrier bag or a cat. So we're in the interview now. You've arrived, you've no cat, you've met the interviewers, you know what they look like because you've done your stalking on LinkedIn. The first question you're going to get is, talk me through your CV. Talk to me about your career to date. This bit is the best part of the interview in my opinion because it's a chance for you to sell yourself without them asking you any questions. You can just talk about the key pieces you want them to know. My advice with this is keep it concise but cover everything. So if you're a grad, I would go through all of your education in not so much detail in terms of the modules that you've done, but I'd call it maybe key modules that you've covered that are relevant for the role. That's always really important. If you have work experience, I'd cover it. Even if you're applying for your first proper job, like your career job, but you have experience in McDonald's as an example, I'd say that. And call out the type of transferable skills that you have from that, like customer service, maybe you've dealt with cash, etc. So keep it concise, don't ramble about your CV. If you put my CV in front of me, I could talk to you for about 2 hours and probably keep going. You want to keep it concise, but cover all of your roles. And when I say concise, what I really mean is, and this is probably for people with a bit of work experience, when you're walking through the roles that you've done, I'd stick to 3 key responsibilities and then 1 highlight and then move on to the next role. You don't want to give any more detail than that, so try and wrap up your responsibilities into 3 key responsibilities. 1 highlight or achievement, move on to the next. If you've multiple roles where you had the same responsibility, so maybe you worked in McDonald's and you managed a team of people, and then you moved on to Bewley's and you also managed a team of people, but you also did some stuff with the cash desk, I wouldn't call out on the CV or in interview both times that you've managed people because it's implied. We know you've done that before at McDonald's, we don't need to know that you've done it again in your next job. And cover gaps. So this applies more to the CV. When you're talking through the CV at interview, I'd acknowledge if there's a gap more than 2 months. So if it's travel, I'd call that out on the CV in the first instance. Anything more than 2 months, I probably would just mention at a high level what it was without going into anything personal. So it could be, you know, you were a carer for a family member or whatever, but I would acknowledge it and not wait for the question because I promise you, if there's a gap of more than 2 months on your CV with no explanation, your employer, your potential employer will want to know how you funded yourself or what you were doing there. And there's no shame in saying I was looking for a job. It could be 6 months, 12 months, whatever. If you're looking for a job, that's what you say. But don't gloss over because that's a bit shady. So once the CV review is done, again, depending on the format of the interview, this piece might happen during the CV review, but if HR is in the room, it'll be quite structured. So they'll do a CV review first, then they'll come on to these competency-based questions. These are questions that start with, tell me about a time when you've had to, and they'll ask you a question about something that you've done in the past. The competencies that they pick, you're probably not going to know what they are. So my advice for preparing for these is for you guys just to think of really difficult situations you've been in the past, either at college or in work. So when I say difficult, I mean horrible bosses, difficult colleagues, difficult clients, where you've had multiple priorities at once, so maybe 10 deadlines in college to submit stuff, whatever it is, I'd write down a few lines. So similar when we went through the job spec and you were writing down scenarios, for the competency-based questions, I do the same. I wouldn't try and shoehorn any of these scenarios into a question, just think of difficult scenarios, maybe 8 altogether. Write them down, write down what the scenario was, write down the part you played in the scenario or the outcome of the scenario, and maybe write down the resolution, and that's it. And that's your prep. Don't learn it off by heart. Write it, read it once, and then put it away. You just want those scenarios fresh in your mind, but you don't want it to be learned off so that if or when a competency-based question arises the next day at interview, you have these scenarios in your mind, and I promise you, your brain will just gravitate to one of them and you'll start talking about it because it's fresh from the prep the day before. The worst thing you can do here is write down sentences and learn them off by heart, because if the competency question that you're expecting to be asked isn't asked, you're left with this mumble jumble of stuff that you've learned off that doesn't fit into any question that's been asked. So think of scenarios. This piece is also really important for competency-based questions. As an interviewer, I don't care what the team did. So I don't care when you say, we did this, we did that, I'm thinking, what did you do? What did you do? And a good interviewer will ask you, they'll be like, okay, but what part did you play in that? So to avoid that question coming up, when you're answering your question, particularly for the competency-based ones, you're saying I did this, I did that. It just makes it very transparent in terms of the part you played in the resolution. And speaking of resolution, I use the STAR technique. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have come across this in some way, shape or form. If not, just Google it. It'll give you really good, it's very, I don't want to say basic, but it is quite a basic tool, but it is an excellent tool for answering competency-based questions in particular. The A piece is the most important. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result, and it's really how you should answer a competency-based question to give a very clear view of the scenario. The situation, task, and result are, I'd say, secondary. You need them to complete the story, but all I care about as an interviewer is the action. What did you do? So the I piece, the A piece here in this instance. So focus on start, answer these, but use the A. That should probably be about 60% of the time is the explanation of the A. Once that piece is done, so you've your CV review done, you've your competency-based questions done, you can sit back and relax then because that's the difficult part over. They will usually end with, do you have any questions for me? So the key piece here is every question that you ask here needs to show you in a positive light. So what I mean by that is there's going to be questions that you want to know. What's the team structure? Is it hybrid working? What time is lunch? What are the hours of work? The interviewer is not going to be, they're not going to be unimpressed by that question, right? It's just going to be a nothing question, like a neutral light question. They're not going to sit down at the end of the day, review all the interviews and say, oh, John asked a really great question about hybrid working. That just won't happen. So you want to make sure the questions that you ask are questions where the interviewer is like, that's a great question. Those other questions are definitely important, don't get me wrong, and I said this earlier, those questions you can get answered as part of the process, just not in interview. So if you're working with a good recruiter like me, or if you're working with a good HR person within the company that you're interviewing for, they'll say to you, right, what you want to know, that I can get the answer and I'll do that. And you tell them everything that you want to know, dress code, all of that stuff that's not putting you in a positive light in an interview, you'll get that from your recruiter. So focus on the role or company is how I would suggest you think about your questions. So good questions on the role could be, and hopefully you'll get an overview of the role as part of the interview actually, but a good question on the role could be about success. So you could say something like, okay, Mr. Interviewer, if I'm in the job and I'm in 6 months and you're speaking to a colleague and you're saying that I'm doing a great job, what is it that I'm doing that's making you say that? What are the behaviors that I'm displaying that make you say that? That will make the interviewer thinking, my God, this guy is so good. But he'd also give you an overview of what he expects from the role. So you, as an interviewee, you're thinking, okay, this guy has really high expectations. If I do get an offer for the job, is that something I can step up to or not? So you're getting some value add from the conversation, but you're really, that's a question that the guy is going to go away and think that was a really good question to ask me, because it shows not only that you want the job, you want to be good in the job, and that will land with him quite well. So questions on the role, always quite positive, or questions on the company. So you'll definitely check the website. The question on the company can be a pretty boring question, but it's the lead up to how you ask that question is the good part here. So instead of saying something about what are your expansion plans in the future or something like that, I would say, and this comes back to all the reading that you've done, I would say, well, as part of the preparation for this interview, I was doing a lot of research into the company, and I actually read an article from the Irish Times 4 weeks ago that said XYZ about this company. What are your thoughts on that? So what are your thoughts on that is a boring question, but the punch is before that, where this guy is thinking, okay, this person who's interviewing has really done their research, they really want to be part of this company, and it just sets you apart from the other candidates who will say, I saw on your website that your values are blah, 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 and it's some sort of, you want to be set apart from everybody else, I guess is what I'm saying. So doing research outside of the website is really important, but bringing that into the interview is the most important part, because you want them to know that you've done it. And that's what I've just said. There's back to the picture of you reading again. This is a great opportunity to show off the research that you've done without saying, I've done loads of research. You're just shoehorning it into a question at the end. So that'll be the interview over. Then we come to the feedback, which is probably the most exciting or not so exciting part, depending. So positive, you got the job, great. My advice would be, first of all, to celebrate. And I mean celebrate, yes, you got the job, great, but also, as a recruiter, with my recruiter hat on, when I advertise a job, I probably get about 300 applications over the course of a week. So out of those 300, I'd filter through them all. I'd pick maybe 20 people to call, like the top 20. And then out of those 20, I'd probably send 8 to 10 CVs across. So out of those CVs, maybe 4 people get called for interview, and then they'll offer to 1. So if you look at all of those different steps that you've gone through and you come out on top, you definitely should celebrate that. Regardless if you want to take the offer or not, which is almost a separate topic, definitely it's time for celebration. But this next point is so important. And this is where the other questions come in that you're not asking in the interview because they're boring. Digest the offer. So not only the salary, you want to know the benefits, you want to know hybrid working, you want to know what they wear, all of the questions that you want to ask that you didn't ask in the interview because they're boring, you go back to whoever gave you the offer with those questions and you say, thanks so much, I'm thrilled. Can you answer all of these 30 questions for me? I want 24 hours to think about it and I'll come back to you. That's expected nowadays. And as well, the reason why I'd like you to think about it, so some people will say, they'll bite your hand off, I'm taking the job, and they'll be thrilled. But for a lot of people, particularly when you have some work experience, all the compensation packages are not equal, right? So they might have a really good base salary, but they don't do pension. And maybe your current job has a shitty base salary, but a really strong pension. So there's stuff that you need to weigh up. So I would say take the 24 hours to digest, and then once you've done that, then I would accept. Obviously, don't resign once you've accepted. Wait until you've signed the contract before you go through any resignation. Contact your references. So this is also as important, and probably more important now that I'm as a recruiter, I see the value of this from a client or from an employer's perspective. A lot of the big companies, so Deutsche Bank as an example, who I used to work for, they don't give references. So if you go to Deutsche Bank and say, hi, I'd like a reference for Keith Grant, they'd want to say I'm amazing, but they don't by law. What they'll say is, Keith Grant worked here from this date to this date, thanks, goodbye, that's it. That doesn't cut it really nowadays with my clients. They want to know the ins and outs of the person before they really go forward for offer. So a good way to get that is a personal reference. So a lot of people get a bit uptight about asking for personal references because they know company policy is not to give references. My advice would be speak to an old manager that you would know quite well and ask them to give you a personal reference, but be very clear that they're not speaking on behalf of any employer, they're speaking on behalf of themselves. So it's only them talking about you and not them on behalf of this company talking about you. You'll find if you take it that way, you're much easier inclined to get a reference from them. So contact those references and say, Keith from recruitment or whoever's going to be in touch to give for a reference, just to let you know, so that they're ready to go. Do you have a question? It depends. So for me, nothing written. As a recruiter, I'll call the person and I'll say, talk to me about their performance, were they in the top 10%, bottom 10%, any issue with lateness. I'll just go through all of those standard questions. I'll get a good view of the person. I'll write a profile and send that to the client. But every company will do it differently. But contact your references. So you want to pick someone who's going to talk good stuff about you. That's key for a reference. So contact them, let them know someone might be in touch. Have your documents ready for screening. So that's stuff like your degree, your visa, or your passport. Any kind of certifications, qualifications that you need, have those ready to go because you're a screening company or your recruiter will want to see them, and then resign and enjoy your notice period. The other piece then, the other side of the coin is you didn't get the job, right? So we get this all the time. I've gotten this all the time. I'm sure you've all had lots of rejections in the past. There's not really a lot to say here. I have a few points that I'll go through, but really, again, if you look bigger picture, if I look at the feedback from the beginning of the slide or beginning of the presentation, when I talk to my clients, about 80% of the time, it's not because you did a bad interview or the candidate did a bad interview or said something wrong in the interview. It's because the successful candidate is more closely aligned because they have more experience or more relevant experience, or sometimes they're cheaper, they don't want as high a salary. So it's not really anything within your control, I guess is what I'm saying. But there is that 15% that is in your control. So the first point always, if you get rejected, is to ask for feedback. Always, 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 always. You might not get it, so they might just say, we don't have any feedback to share, but I would always ask in the first instance. And once you get that then, digest it. I wouldn't place blame on anyone, oh, that company was crap anyway, I didn't want to work for them, or I didn't like that hiring manager, I didn't click with him, or never blame the recruiter because we're always the best. But try not to place blame. And it's so difficult to do in the moment, I know it is, but try and take a step back and really look at the situation and understand, is there anything that you can learn from or grow from? Sometimes there's not. Sometimes you did an amazing interview, but he did it better and he got the job, unfortunately. That's just how the cookie crumbles. But definitely ask for feedback and see if there are parts or pieces that you can take where you can grow from, and then keep going, which obviously is self-explanatory. But I promise you, you'll get, I think I'd maybe 4 or 5 rejections before I got my job at Deutsche Bank when I was a grad. Keep going and you'll get there. You will definitely get there if you continue to ask for feedback and then implement the feedback if there's something specific that you're doing. If it's a case that the other candidate was better, there's not a lot that you can do there, but definitely keep on going. So that brings me to the end. I'll just quickly go through, I don't know what happened there. Well, I'll just summarize what we covered off. Essentially, there was 3 areas. So the first part is definitely preparation is key. Oh. We don't want to go through this again. There you go. So preparation is key for any interview. If you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. A lot of reading. During the interview, concise CV review. Don't waffle on for ages. Nobody cares. They just want the relevant pieces of your job. Use the STAR technique to answer your competency-based questions. Really relevant questions at the end. Focus them on the role. Focus them on the company. And then after the interview, review, reflect, reward. So review the feedback, review the offer, reflect on the offer, reflect on the feedback, and then reward yourself regardless. As I said, even if you're unsuccessful, go back to what I was saying as a recruiter with my 300 applications. If you're called for interview and I only get 4 interviews out of those 300, that's already a significant achievement, so well done on that. And that's it. There's a bit about me. So I don't have an Instagram, not that you would like to follow, but Derek and Mavis do. They'd love you to say hello. But follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I post all of my jobs there. I specialize in financial services, but we do get stuff in project management, business analysis, etc. We'll be more than happy to connect. And I've been told I'm not allowed to take any questions because of time, but I will. Any questions?
Yeah. So let's say I got a job, but I also got an offer from another country. How do I say no to one of them in the most elegant way that still allows me to apply?
Just say no. So as in, I would say, I'd be very transparent from the, so if you're working with a recruiter like me, I would be transparent from the outset to say, look, I'm in another process with AIB or with someone else or whatever it is, so I know. And then I will want to understand then what's your motivation for your next job. So if you have 2 offers on the table, I'd have a very transparent, not all recruiters do this, some people just want to get the fee and they'll just encourage you to take your job. I want to understand what's your career aspiration, where do you want to get to? So talk to me, 10, 15 years, what role do you see yourself in? And then out of both offers that you have on the table, which one is the one that you really want, will help you get there, I guess is the question. And you might say, I don't really care, I just want more money, and this one's more money, so I'm taking it, which is great, because that's also really important to some people. So I would say then, if you're saying to me, you're going to go to XYZ, I'll ask why. You'll tell me it's because they've more money or something else. Then that will help me then going forward, I guess, when I was talking to other candidates. But that's all I would do. You're not burning your bridge there if you're transparent from the outset that you're in another process. Any other questions? Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of your day.